I jolted awake, my mind reeling after Thanksgiving night. My phone delivered a cold notification. My bank account had been drained to just a few dollars. All $95,000, the savings I'd poured years of sweat into, gone. Outside, the car I'd recently bought was missing, and the one behind the wheel was my foster brother. I rushed to confront him, but all I got in return were the shouts and accusations from my foster parents, branding me petty, selfish, and ungrateful. In that moment, memories of my childhood flooded back. Days locked in the diner, washing dishes and waiting tables like a slave while their biological son was pampered and casually pocketed my meager tips. But this time, I wouldn't stay silent. I swore I'd take my foster parents and brother to court to make justice, force them to pay for everything they'd done to me. Hello, my name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm 28 years old, living in Seattle, Washington, where the rain falls softly year-round and the air always carries the faint scent of roasted coffee. I work as a barista and shift manager at a small cafe on the corner of Pike Street, where I craft frothy lattes and chat with regulars about everything from soccer to rare snowstorms. But that's just my day job. My true passion is photography. I love wandering Seattle's wet streets, camera dangling from my chest, capturing moments when light pierces through tree canopies or glints off Lake Union's surface. Each photo tells a story, and I've always believed my life is a story worth telling, even if it hasn't been an easy one. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, in a family of Colombian immigrants. My foster parents, the Martinezes, adopted me as an infant from an orphanage in Bogota. They told me they'd traveled thousands of miles to bring me home, as if it were a fairy tale. But the truth was far from magical. The Martinezes ran a small Colombian diner in Boise, serving empanadas and arepa, where the smell of grilled meat and sautéed onions clung to my hair and clothes throughout my childhood. I was their only foster child, alongside their biological son, Diego, 2 years younger than me. Diego was the center of their world, while I was a silent shadow always pushed to the margins. At 17, I ran away from home. Not a penny in my pocket, not a word of goodbye. I still remember that night in Boise, the air so cold my breath turned to mist. I grabbed an old tattered backpack, stuffed it with a few clothes and a notebook, and walked out of the house that had caged me for years. I couldn't endure another day. The beatings, the verbal abuse, the feeling of being an outsider in my own family. I told myself that even if I starved out there, I'd be free. And I made it. I survived those early days through grueling manual labor, each day a battle to keep from drowning. I washed dishes in rundown restaurants, my hands blistered from scalding soapy water, my back aching from hours under dim fluorescent lights. Some nights I worked as a loader in warehouses until dawn, hauling heavy crates in Boise's biting cold for a few bucks, just enough for a loaf of bread. I slept in cheap motels where the stench of mildew and the sound of arguments seeped through thin walls. Once I curled up in a park corner, clutching my backpack for warmth when I couldn't afford a night's stay. I cut all contact with the Martinezes. No calls, no letters. They never bothered to look for me. To them, I was likely just a burden lifted, a shadow that had vanished from their lives. Seattle is where I found myself, but the road there was thorny. I started from nothing, working myself to exhaustion, sometimes eating only once a day to save every penny. I remember mornings waking up in a cramped motel room, faint sunlight filtering through dusty windows, telling myself I had to keep going, if only to prove I wasn't the ungrateful person they'd called me. I bought my first camera, a battered Nikon with a scratched lens, from a pawn shop, using savings from 3 months of nonstop side jobs. That camera became my first ray of light in the darkness. I roamed Seattle's wet streets, photographing rain, streetlights, and strangers' faces. My photos started getting noticed. A client hired me for a wedding shoot, then a small cafe bought a few landscapes to hang on their walls. I began selling photos online. Each dollar earned a testament that I could rise even after being pushed to the bottom. Life isn't lavish, but I'm content. I have a tiny apartment in Capitol Hill, a few close friends, and every morning I breathe the air of freedom I traded everything for. But deep inside, there's always been an emptiness, a scar called family. And that scar, which I thought had healed, began to bleed again through an unexpected call from Helen, our old neighbor in Boise. That day, her voice trembled over the line as she told me that my foster father, Carlos, had nearly died from a heart attack. "They need you, Pedro," she said, her words carrying both sincerity and a hint of pleading. "They won't say it, but I know they want you to come back." I stood in my small kitchen, clutching a cold coffee mug, my mind spinning. Helen was one of the few people in Boise who had treated me kindly, slipping me cookies when I was exhausted in the Martinez Diner's kitchen. I knew she wasn't calling just to share news about Carlos. She felt guilty. Guilty for witnessing the years I was exploited and berated, unable to do more than offer small gestures of kindness. "I saw everything, Pedro," she once told me, her eyes red. "I wish I could have done more for you." Perhaps she hoped this call would mend the family, give me a chance to reclaim some warmth I'd never truly had. But neither she nor I could have foreseen that her invitation would unwittingly lead me into a trap. There was no deceit in her voice, only the naivety of someone who believed time could heal all wounds. I wanted to hang up, to continue my life free of the Martinezes. But another part of me, small, fragile, perhaps naive, whispered that I should give them a chance. After all, they had raised me, however warped and painful that love had been. Maybe time had changed them. So I decided to return to Boise for Thanksgiving, my first time back in over a decade. After years of no contact, I picked up the phone to call my foster family. On the other end, Rosa's voice faltered when she heard my name, then burst with emotion. "Pedro, is that you?" "My God, I thought I'd never hear your voice again." Her voice trembled with excitement, as if 1,000 words were trying to spill out at once. "Are you okay? How's life in Seattle? Why have you been silent for so long?" I stayed quiet for a moment before cutting in. "I'm just calling to say I'll be coming home for Thanksgiving." A cry of joy erupted from the other end. "You're really coming back? Oh, this is the greatest gift for the whole family. Your father will be so happy." "No, we'll all be so happy. We'll make tamales, roast a turkey like the old days. I'll get your room ready, She rambled on, her voice so eager it felt almost frantic, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. But amid her laughter and breathless excitement, I caught something unnatural, as if her joy wasn't purely maternal. I gripped the phone tightly, keeping my voice calm. "I'm just coming to visit. That's all, Mom." On the other end, Rosa continued, Yes, of course. Just come back. We'll set up a room for you. You'll see. Things will be different this time." In that moment, a chill ran down my spine. Her joy felt like more than excitement. It was as if she were anticipating something prearranged. The night before I left, I sat on my sofa, the streetlight filtering through the window, illuminating a photo I'd hung on the wall, a misty trail in Olympic National Park. I wondered what I was doing. Why was I returning to a place I'd sworn never to set foot in again? But then I remembered Rosa's eyes, the rare moments she called me son with kindness. I recalled the smell of her tamales during the holidays, the way Carlos used to laugh loudly while telling stories about Colombia. Those memories, though few, were like small sparks in the darkness of my childhood. Maybe, I thought, this was a chance to heal, or at least to close a chapter I'd left unresolved for too long. The week before, I prepared as if for a fateful journey. I didn't want to show up empty-handed, didn't want them to think I was returning to beg or plead. I chose gifts with a touch of Colombia, a reminder that despite leaving, I still remembered my roots. A bag of pure Colombian Supremo coffee beans, roasted by my own hands at the cafe, carefully wrapped in a rustic burlap sack tied with twine. A bottle of aguardiente, the traditional liquor Carlos loved, though he rarely shared it with me. I stood at the liquor store, fingers tracing the bottle's label, recalling nights he sat drinking alone on the porch, muttering in Spanish I couldn't understand. And finally, a landscape photo I'd taken at Lake Coeur d'Alene, printed in a simple wooden frame. It showed a golden barley field under a sunset, the wind whispering of freedom. I wanted this gift to be a message, that I still valued family despite the deep wounds it had inflicted. On the day of departure, Seattle's drizzle seemed to beg me to stay. I drove my new car, a silver Toyota Corolla, my pride after months of hard work, toward Boise. My camera sat on the passenger seat like a talisman. The 8-hour drive stretched on, and I couldn't shake a growing unease. I turned on the radio, hoping music would drown out my chaotic thoughts. But as Boise's familiar roads came into view, my heart pounded, as if I were driving into a trap I couldn't yet see. The Martinez house appeared before me just as I remembered. A low wooden house painted pale yellow with a peeling white fence. The smell of food, grilled meat, fried corn, and tamales, wafted from the kitchen window, pulling me back to my childhood. I stood at the door, clutching my gift bag, and took a deep breath. The doorbell rang, and when the door swung open, there stood Rosa. She wore a floral apron, her hair grayer than I remembered, but her eyes were sharp as knives, glinting with a calculating spark I couldn't ignore. "Pedro?" she said, her voice strangely sweet, like she was playing the role of a loving mother she'd never been. "Come in, son." The word son made me pause. When was the last time she'd called me that? I couldn't recall, maybe during those rare moments when she wanted me to work extra without complaining. I stepped over the threshold, carrying my gift bag and a heavy heart, feeling like I was walking onto a stage already set for a performance. The smell of grilled meat and tamales wafted from the kitchen, mingling with the warm glow of yellow lights, creating a picture of the perfect family. One I'd never truly had. The dining table was set lavishly, adorned with colorful dishes, golden roasted chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, neatly stacked arepas beside a vibrant bowl of salsa. Carlos sat at the head of the table, his large frame imposing, his face flushed as if untouched by illness. I was momentarily surprised. Was this the man who had nearly died from a heart attack? He nodded at me, his smile faint but his eyes probing, as if weighing my worth, or more likely calculating what I could offer them. "Sit down, Pedro," he said, his voice deep but strained, as if concealing a deeper intent. Diego, my foster brother, sat across from me, dressed in a crisp white shirt, flashing a smile I couldn't read. Sickeningly sweet, as if he were playing the part of a close brother we both knew didn't exist. "Long time no see, bro," he said, his voice smooth as honey. But his eyes were cold as steel, flicking over me before darting to our parents. I forced a smile, placing the gift bag on the table, the fragrant Supremo coffee, the bottle of aguardiente, and the framed photo I'd taken at Lake Coeur d'Alene, as a final effort to believe this was just a family dinner. "I brought some gifts from Seattle," I said, my voice slightly shaky, not from fear but from the growing unease. Rosa nodded, but her smile was stiff, as if she were holding back a secret. "That's nice, Pedro," she said, her voice so sweet it sent a shiver down my spine, and she quickly turned away, as if afraid my gaze might pierce through her facade. Carlos only grunted, gesturing for me to sit, but I noticed his hand gripping the edge of the table, a small gesture betraying the tension he tried to hide. Diego shifted in his seat, his eyes glancing at the gifts before looking away, as if they were an inconvenience not worth acknowledging. No one touched them, no one asked about them. Their indifference wasn't just cold, it was part of this act, a way to keep me in a state of uncertainty, vulnerable to manipulation. The meal began with laughter, clinking glasses, and stories I tried to engage with. Rosa talked about their diner, now expanded to 2 locations, her voice brimming with pride, but her eyes constantly darting to me as if gauging my reaction. Diego bragged about his recent promotion at an insurance company, his smile smug. Carlos shared an old story about Colombia, but I noticed he avoided looking at me, instead exchanging subtle glances with Rosa and Diego. I tried to eat, to smile, but every bite of tamale felt stuck in my throat. Something was wrong. Every look, every word from them carried an intent I couldn't grasp. Then Carlos stood holding a bottle of red wine, its label glinting under the light. "Let me pour you a glass," he said, his voice low and oddly warm, like he was playing an unfamiliar role. He walked to my side, pouring the wine into the glass before me, the deep red liquid swirling like blood, giving off a rich aroma with a faint, sharp tang I couldn't immediately place. "Today's a day for reunion, Pedro. Drink for family," he said, his eyes locking onto mine, deep and unreadable, like a predator watching its prey. I gripped the glass, my fingers tight around its stem, my palm sweaty. I wanted to believe this was a kind gesture, that they truly wanted me back. But something about the way he poured the wine, the way Rosa nodded encouragingly, made my heart pound. "Drink, son," Rosa said, her voice soft but her eyes sharp as blades. "Today's a day to let go of the past." I raised the glass, taking a deep breath to push away the unease. I took a small sip, but the liquid was bitter and heavy, unlike any wine I'd tasted in Seattle. The flavor clung to my tongue, a strange sensation spreading through my mouth as if something didn't belong in the wine. I set the glass down, glancing at Diego, and caught him staring at me, a glint of triumph in his eyes. A chilling thought struck me. Something was wrong with this wine. I wanted to stand, to demand answers, but my head began to spin, the room tilting around me. Rosa's laughter warped. Carlos's voice echoed as if from a distance. I gripped the table, trying to stay alert, but my eyelids grew heavy. "Are you okay, Pedro?" Diego asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern, but his smirk screamed the truth. They'd put something in the wine. I tried to speak, to shout that I wasn't tired, that something was wrong, but my tongue felt glued to my mouth. A numbing sensation spread from my fingers through my body, like I was being pulled into an abyss. My vision blurred, the room fading into darkness. The last thing I remembered before collapsing was Diego's gaze. He glanced at our parents, then smirked as if everything had gone according to plan. I heard the clink of glasses, Carlos's voice saying, "To family, to our future." Then everything fell silent, and I slipped into an uneasy, inescapable sleep, my body surrendering to the trap they'd set. I opened my eyes, my head pounding as if struck by a hammer, a relentless throbbing at my temples. My mouth was dry, my tongue heavy as lead, and a wave of dread gripped my chest. I was sprawled on the old sofa in the Martinez living room, a thin blanket loosely draped over me. Morning light filtered through thin curtains, illuminating the scratched wooden floor, and the steady ticking of the wall clock echoed like it was counting down the seconds of this nightmare. I staggered to my feet, my trembling hands reaching for the bag beside me. My camera was still there intact, but my wallet was empty, not a single cent. My heart sank as if I'd fallen into a bottomless pit. I grabbed my phone, fingers shaking. A bank notification glared on the lock screen. My chest tightened, my breath caught. I frantically opened the app, logged in, and the screen displayed a cold truth. My account balance was a mere $3.27. All $95,000, the money I'd poured years of sweat and tears into, earned through barista shifts, wedding photography in the rain, sleepless nights editing photos for online sales. Gone. I scrambled to check the transaction history. The screen showed a chilling line, a massive transfer executed at 2 a.m. to an account under Diego Martinez's name. My foster brother. He'd taken everything. My suspicions grew stronger. I bolted outside, barefoot on the cold ground, hoping my new car, the silver Toyota Corolla, my pride, would still be there. But the front yard was empty. Only faint tire tracks remained on the dirt, mocking me. The car, the one I'd driven from Seattle, the one I polished every weekend, was gone. I remembered Diego's smirk, and a horrifying thought struck. He'd taken it in the night while I was unconscious. To sell? To hide? Or simply to strip me of everything I had? I stormed back into the house, heart pounding, blood boiling. In the kitchen, Carlos, Rosa, and Diego sat around the table, sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. The aroma of the Supremo coffee I'd brought as a gift filled the air, but it did nothing to calm me. "Where's my money?" I shouted, my voice breaking with rage and panic. "Where's my car?" Rosa looked up, her eyes wide with feigned surprise. "Money? Car? What are you talking about, Pedro?" she asked, her voice trembling as if offended. Carlos set his coffee mug down, his brow furrowed in carefully calculated confusion. "What's wrong with you? Barging in here yelling like that? If something's happened, explain it clearly." Diego, across the table, took a sip of coffee, a fleeting smirk crossing his face before vanishing, as if he were suppressing a secret. "Calm down, bro," he said, his voice smooth as venom. "Maybe you're confused." "Confused?" I roared, holding up my phone, the screen displaying the bank statement with its cold accusation. A $95,000 transfer to Diego Martinez's account at 2 a.m. "This is confusion. My $95,000 sent straight to Diego's account. And my car? The Corolla I parked out front last night. Where is it?" I pointed at Diego, my breath heavy, my blood burning. "What did you do with it?" Rosa's expression shifted from fake surprise to a chilling coldness. "How dare you raise your voice at your brother, Pedro?" she said, her voice calm but terrifying. Carlos stood pointing at me, his face red with anger, or perhaps from being exposed. "You ungrateful brat, selfish, petty. We raised you, gave you a roof over your head, and now you dare accuse your family? Who do you think you are, waving that thing?" He jabbed a finger at my phone. "And slandering us?" Diego sat silently, but his eyes gleamed with triumph, as if savoring the performance. I brushed off their excuses, ready to lunge at my foster brother, but Carlos stepped in, blocking my path to Diego. His face flushed, his voice a growl. "Enough, Pedro. Who do you think you are, standing here accusing this family? You've got nothing. No money, no car, no family. Get out of my house now." Carlos's words hit like a punch, not because of their weight, but because they reopened old scars, memories I'd tried to bury long ago. Rosa stood behind him, her eyes cold and sharp, lips pressed tight as if holding back a storm. Diego, still seated, smirked with a defiant glint, his expression like a knife twisting in my chest. I wanted to scream, to shatter their facade of lies, but a flood of memories surged, drowning me in the dark days of my childhood. I saw myself, a 10-year-old boy trapped in the stifling kitchen behind the Martinez diner, my hands submerged in a basin of icy dishwater, skin cracked and bleeding, each cut a reminder of my place. The smell of burnt grease and sautéed onions clung to my hair, my clothes, branding me as nothing more than a servant, a nameless machine. "Hurry up, Pedro," Rosa would bark, brandishing a wooden ladle, her eyes sharp as blades, devoid of mercy. "You want customers to leave because of your dawdling? Useless." I'd clench my teeth, gripping the sponge until my hands trembled, tears welling but swallowed back. I knew if I cried, she'd slap me, call me weak in front of everyone. Those days I was chained to work from sunrise until Boise's streets faded into darkness, washing towering stacks of dishes, carrying heavy trays of food, scrubbing floors until my knees gave out, while Diego, the pampered younger brother, lounged at the counter, nibbling hot empanadas, joking with customers as if he were the center of the universe. I remembered the day I dared to ask for money for school books, a small hope to escape that kitchen. I was 12, standing before Carlos, clutching a teacher's note, sweat dripping down my forehead. "Dad, I need money for books," I stammered, my voice barely audible, as if afraid the wind would steal it. He looked at me, his eyes cold as ice, then let out a scornful laugh. "Books? You think I print money, you leech?" he roared, snatching the note from my hand, tearing it to shreds before my eyes, the pieces falling like fragments of my dreams. "Want to study? Earn it yourself." I stood frozen, my heart crushed, feeling the world collapse beneath me. From then on, I hid the meager tips kind customers slipped me, stashing them in an old tin box under my bed, a secret no one could know. But Diego always found it. He'd sneak into my room, rummage through my things and take every last cent only to show up with new shoes or a shiny phone. "Thanks a lot, Pedro," he'd say, his grin mocking as if stealing my hard-earned money was a game. Rosa saw it all but only ruffled Diego's hair, chuckling. "Let your brother have his fun, don't be so petty." Petty. The word carved itself into my mind, a deep cut, an excuse for the injustice I endured. At night, I'd curl up on my rickety iron bed in the corner of the room listening to laughter from the living room. Carlos recounting tales of Colombia, Rosa praising Diego as the smartest in the family. Diego boasting about his high grades at school, a place I rarely got to go. "The diner's busy, you stay and work." Carlos would order whenever I asked to attend school, his tone leaving no room for protest. On the rare days I made it to class, I was always the last to arrive, clothes reeking of grease, books incomplete, eyes sunken from exhaustion. Classmates looked at me, some with pity, some with mockery, but I didn't want pity. I just wanted to be treated like a person, to be called part of a family. But to the Martinezes, I was a tool, a pair of hands to wash dishes until they bled, a back to carry trays until it broke, a shadow to absorb their anger when the diner was packed or Diego messed up. The most painful memory was the night I left the Martinez home at 17. I stood in the dark corner of my room gripping the straps of a tattered backpack, stuffed with a few old t-shirts and a notebook of unfinished dreams. I'd prepared for weeks, saving every spare cent from side jobs at a nearby bakery, hiding them in an old sock under the floorboards. That night, Boise's wind howled through the window cracks, chilling me to the bone. I walked out of the house, my heart heavy as stone. But I didn't look back. I didn't leave out of resentment, but exhaustion. Exhausted from being a stranger in that house. As the dim streetlights cast my shadow on the pavement, I vowed to myself I wouldn't let them hurt me again. But now, standing in this kitchen, facing the people who stole my childhood, I realized history was repeating itself. They'd taken my $95,000, the car I'd sweated blood and tears to buy, and the last shred of trust I'd placed in them. Mr. Carlos still stood there, blocking Diego's path, his eyes blazing as if they could burn me to ashes. Mrs. Rosa pursed her lips, her hands tightly gripping her coffee cup, while Diego, he sat there, smirking, looking at me like I was a fool. I raised my phone, the screen still displaying the bank statement, the cold, hard evidence of the 2 a.m. transfer. "Do you think I'll just let this go?" I said, my voice trembling but sharp, each word spat out from my chest. "Do you think I'm still that little boy from before who'd bow his head and walk away? Not this time. This time, I'll make you all pay." Mr. Carlos sneered, his smile that of a man convinced he was untouchable. "Pay?" he growled, stepping closer, his breath reeking of coffee. "You've got nothing, Pedro. You dare threaten us? You dare stand against us? You'll lose like you always do." Mrs. Rosa nodded, her eyes cold as ice. "Have you forgotten how we raised you?" she said, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "You should be grateful, not standing here making accusations." Diego said nothing, just took another sip of coffee, but his eyes flickered with a hint of unease, the first time I'd seen him not entirely in control of the situation. Their words cut like knives, but instead of breaking me, they only fueled the fire inside me. I looked straight into Mr. Carlos's eyes, then Mrs. Rosa's, then Diego's, and I knew this was the defining moment. I had been silent for too long, letting them exploit me, from the meager tips of my childhood to the money and car I'd sweated to earn. But no more. I took a deep breath, the cold Boise air filling my chest, making me more alert than ever. "I swear," I said, my voice low but resolute, "I'll take all 3 of you to court. I'll sue you for exploiting me since I was a child, for stealing my money and my car. I won't let you take my future again." That oath wasn't just words, it was a promise to myself, to the trembling boy Pedro in the diner's kitchen, to the sleepless nights in Seattle rebuilding my life. Mr. Carlos laughed, but the sound no longer scared me. "Sue," he mocked, pointing at me. You think you've got the guts for that? A nobody photographer, a nothing daring to sue the Martinez family? You'll only make yourself a laughing stock. Mrs. Rosa shook her head as if I were a foolish child. Don't make things worse, Pedro, she said. Just leave like you did before. It'll be better for everyone. But I wasn't the Pedro from 10 years ago. No longer the boy who left home with a broken heart. I'd learned to stand tall, to fight. I looked at them one last time, my gaze steady. You'll see, I said, my voice calm but carrying a strength I hadn't realized I possessed. I'll prove you wrong. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, the scent of Supremo coffee lingering in the air, but now it only reminded me that I'd given them a piece of my soul, only to be betrayed in return. I stepped into the yard, the cold wind blowing past, carrying away painful memories. The front yard was empty where my Corolla once stood. Now only faint tire marks remained. I had no car, no money, but I had evidence. The bank statement, memories of years of exploitation, and an ironclad resolve. I pulled out my phone and called Jake, my lawyer friend in Seattle. Jake, I said, my voice hoarse from exhaustion but no less determined. I need your help. They took everything, my money, my car, everything. I want to sue them. Jake was silent for a moment, then replied, Send me everything you've got, Pedro. We'll start from there. I hung up, the morning sunlight hitting my face, and I felt a strange sense of liberation. Not because I'd won, not yet, the battle was just beginning. But for the first time, I no longer felt like a victim. I was Pedro Hernandez, the man who survived the harshest days, who built a life from nothing. And now I would use that same strength to reclaim justice. I looked back at the pale yellow house one last time, not with pain, but with a promise. I would return, not to beg, but to make them face the consequences of what they'd done. I caught the last bus back to Seattle, sitting by the window, the streetlights flickering on the glass. I thought about my small apartment in Capitol Hill, the photo of Lake Coeur d'Alene hanging on the wall, the golden barley fields glowing under the sunset. That photo was a reminder that I could still find light, even in the darkest days. But now, as the bus rolled through Idaho's shadowy roads, my heart no longer felt as heavy as before. Instead, a steady flame of determination burned in my chest. I'd lost money, my car, and the last shred of trust I had in the Martinez family, but I hadn't lost myself. And I would use that strength to take back what was mine. Back in my Seattle apartment, I felt the fragile peace of a familiar space. The small room with the faint smell of coffee from the kitchen corner, the worn sofa where I often sat editing photos, and the Lake Coeur d'Alene photo on the wall, quietly reminding me of what I'd built from nothing. I opened my laptop and checked the bank statement again. The only evidence I had of the $95,000 transfer to Diego's account at 2 a.m. The screen lit up, the cold text like a silent accusation. I saved it to a separate file, took screenshots, and sent them to Jake, my lawyer friend. This is the first piece of evidence, I texted. What can you do with it? Jake replied immediately, his voice steady over the phone. This is a good start, Pedro. An unauthorized transfer is a serious crime, but we'll need more evidence to pin the whole family, especially if you want to sue for child labor exploitation. Do you have anything else? Any documents, witnesses, or anything tied to those years in Boise? I went silent, my mind racing. Those years were like a book I'd tried to close, but now I had to open it again, flipping through each painful page to uncover the truth. I started the next day. After every shift at the coffee shop, I spent time gathering evidence. I dug through an old keepsake box under my bed, a rusty tin containing scraps from my childhood. Inside, I found a notebook where I'd scribbled notes as a 14-year-old about my days working at the Martinez family's diner. The messy handwriting listed the hours I worked from early morning to midnight, unpaid, without a day off. Saturday, washed dishes 8 hours, served 4 hours. Diego took $3 tip. Sunday, mopped floors, cleared tables, got scolded for being slow. Those naive words were vivid proof of the years I was exploited. I photographed every page and sent them to Jake. I also contacted Mrs. Helen, the neighbor who'd called to tell me about my foster father. Over the phone, her voice trembled. "Pedro, I saw how they treated you. You didn't deserve that. If you need me to say anything in court, I'll do it." I wrote down her words, feeling like I'd found a spark in the darkness. Mrs. Helen agreed to be a witness, recounting the time she saw me working like an adult while Diego was pampered. Next, I checked the car's GPS tracker, a feature I'd installed on my Corolla before driving to Boise. The app showed the car had moved to a lot on the outskirts of Boise, not far from the Martinez house. I sent the information to Jake, a chilling thought hitting me. Diego might have sold the car or hidden it to cover his tracks. Jake reassured me, "If the car's still there, we can trace the transaction. Stay calm, let me dig deeper." Every step I took, every piece of evidence I gathered was like a brick in the wall of justice I was determined to build. I reached out to an old co-worker from the Martinez diner, someone I'd worked with back in Boise. Juan, now living in Portland, still remembered those days clearly. "You were treated like a slave, Pedro," he said over the phone, his voice full of anger. "I saw you work until you collapsed while Diego sat around playing. If you need me, I'll testify in court." Juan's words were like a gust of wind fueling my resolve. I noted his statement, adding him to the witness list. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this fight wasn't just about reclaiming my money and car. It was about reclaiming my childhood, holding those who exploited me accountable. One evening, sitting in my apartment as streetlight filtered through the window, I wrote a letter to myself, a reminder that I wasn't just fighting for myself, but for the trembling boy Pedro in the diner's kitchen, who once dreamed of a day he'd be free. "You deserve this, Pedro," I wrote. "You deserve justice." A few weeks later, Jake called, his voice brimming with excitement. "Pedro, we've got enough to file the lawsuit. The bank statement, the car's GPS, the testimonies from Helen and Juan, they're all strong evidence. I'll draft the complaint charging Diego with theft and your foster parents with child labor exploitation. Are you ready?" I took a deep breath, glancing at the Lake Coeur d'Alene photo on the wall. "I'm ready," I said, my voice firm. The day the summons was sent to the Martinez house, I imagined their faces as they opened the envelope. Mr. Carlos, the man always smug with his scornful smile, would surely freeze for a moment, realizing he couldn't overpower this with his usual roar. Mrs. Rosa, whose icy eyes had made me tremble so many times, would likely panic, her tears no longer able to hide the truth. And Diego, the foster brother who smirked every time he snatched my meager tips, wouldn't be smiling anymore. Just thinking of that moment filled me with a strange mix of pain, satisfaction, and regret for what could have been a real family. A week later, Jake texted that the Martinez family had reached out trying to negotiate. "They called me yesterday," he said. "Rosa was crying, saying you're destroying the family." Carlos threatened to countersue, but they have no ground to stand on. "Do you want to meet them?" Before I could reply, my phone buzzed. A strange number from Boise. I answered, and Mrs. Rosa's trembling, tearful voice came through. "Pedro, my son, how could you do this to your family? We raised you, don't you remember? Drop the lawsuit and we'll settle this quietly." Mr. Carlos cut in, his voice hoarse. "You want to ruin our reputation? Stop this, Pedro, for your own sake." I heard Diego in the background muttering something, but he didn't dare speak up. I stayed silent, letting their pleas fall into the void. Then I said, my voice cold as ice, "You had your chance to do the right thing. Not anymore. See you in court." I hung up, my heart pounding, but not from anger, because I knew for the first time in my life I was in control. A few days later, as I was brewing coffee in my apartment, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there they were, all three of them, Mr. Carlos, Mrs. Rosa, and Diego, crowded in the narrow Capitol Hill hallway. Mrs. Rosa clutched her face, tears streaming down, but her eyes were still sharp, as if performing a well-rehearsed play. "Pedro, my son," she sobbed, "you can't do this to us. We're family." Mr. Carlos stood behind her, his face flushed, but his voice softened, almost pleading. "Drop the lawsuit, Pedro. We'll give you back the money, the car. Don't take this too far." Diego for the first time lowered his head, mumbling, "Brother, I was wrong. Forgive me." I looked at them one by one, feeling like I was seeing familiar ghosts from my childhood. I stood tall, my voice cold but steady. "You had decades to be a family. You chose to take everything from me. Now face the consequences." I slammed the door shut, cutting off their words, my heart pounding but unwavering. They'd lost me, and I wouldn't let them take anything more. In the days that followed, I returned to my life in Seattle. But every step I took, every coffee I brewed, every photo I snapped carried a single purpose: justice. I was no longer the trembling boy Pedro in the diner's kitchen, no longer the foster child bowing under harsh words. I was Pedro Hernandez, 28 years old, and I was ready to face the Martinez family in court. The day of the trial arrived, and the Boise sky was overcast, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The district courthouse was an old building with cold stone corridors and the echo of footsteps. I walked into the courtroom clutching the small briefcase containing the documents Jake had prepared: the bank statement, the car's GPS data, the childhood notebook with its scribbled entries, and the testimonies of Mrs. Helen and Juan. Jake patted my shoulder, his eyes brimming with confidence. "We've got everything, Pedro," he said. "Today you'll tell the world the truth." I nodded, affirming my resolve. The Martinez family entered the courtroom, and for the first time I saw them without their usual arrogance. Mr. Carlos wore a faded gray suit, his shoulders slightly hunched as if the weight of the summons pressed down on him. Mrs. Rosa, in a simple black dress, tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but her hands trembled as she clutched a handkerchief. Diego, head bowed, walked slowly, his eyes avoiding mine. They sat on the other side of the courtroom, separated by the polished wooden barrier of the lawyers' tables, but the distance couldn't hide the tension radiating from them. The judge, a stern middle-aged woman, banged her gavel to start the proceedings. Jake stood, presenting the case with a calm but sharp voice. "Your Honor," he began, "we have clear evidence that the defendant, Diego Martinez, illegally transferred $95,000 from the plaintiff Pedro Hernandez's bank account on the night of Thanksgiving. Additionally, a Toyota Corolla owned by Mr. Hernandez was stolen, with GPS data showing it was moved to a lot in Boise by Diego Martinez. Furthermore, we accuse Mr. Carlos and Mrs. Rosa Martinez of exploiting Mr. Hernandez's labor as a child during the years he lived under their guardianship." Jake laid out each piece of evidence: the bank statement, the car's GPS data, the notebook with young Pedro's scribbled notes, and the testimonies of Mrs. Helen and Juan, who had witnessed the injustices I endured. When Jake placed the notebook on the judge's bench, I saw Mrs. Rosa lower her head, her hands gripping the handkerchief tightly. Mr. Carlos cleared his throat as if trying to break the silence, but his eyes avoided mine. Diego shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face pale. Their lawyer, a short man with gold-rimmed glasses, stood to counter. "Your Honor," he said, his voice smooth but unconvincing, "the Martinez family raised Mr. Hernandez from a young age, providing him with a home, food, and love. These accusations are baseless, merely the vengeful act of an ungrateful son. The money was a family misunderstanding, and the car, it was only borrowed temporarily. As for the labor exploitation, that was just household chores as any child does to help their family." My blood boiled. "Household chores?" I wanted to shout. "Household chores don't involve washing dishes until your hands bleed, serving for hours without rest, or being denied school to work like a slave." Jake placed a hand on my shoulder, sensing the anger rising in me. "Stay calm," he whispered. "Let them dig their own grave." Mrs. Helen was called to the witness stand. She walked slowly, her silver hair glinting under the courtroom lights. "I saw Pedro working like an adult in the Martinez family's diner," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He washed dishes, mopped floors, and served from morning to night while Diego, Their biological son sat playing. I heard Carlos call him ungrateful. Heard Rosa scold him for asking for money to buy books. That wasn't household chores, that was exploitation. Her words were like a stone thrown into a still lake, rippling through the courtroom. I saw Mrs. Rosa bow her head lower, as if trying to escape the gazes around her. Juan, my old co-worker, took the stand next. He recounted the days I collapsed from exhaustion in the kitchen, the times Diego took my tips without anyone intervening. Pedro wasn't treated like family, he said, his voice thick with indignation. He was an unpaid worker while Diego was pampered. Each of Juan's words was like a hammer striking the wall of lies the Martinez family had built. When my turn came, I stepped up to the stand, my heart pounding but my steps steady. I looked directly at the judge, then glanced at the Martinez family. I don't want to be here for revenge, I said, my voice low but clear. I just want justice. They took my childhood, forcing me to work like a slave from a young age. And on Thanksgiving night, they took $95,000 in my car. Things I worked tirelessly to earn. I'm not asking for their love anymore. I just want them to pay for what they've done. The Martinez family's lawyer tried to deflect. He called me selfish, claiming I was slandering the family that raised me. He argued the money was a family gift and the car was merely borrowed. But the judge interrupted, asking to see the bank statement and GPS data. When she examined my notebook, her eyes narrowed and I knew she saw the truth in those scribbled lines. The trial stretched through the day, each minute feeling like a battle. The Martinez family tried to maintain a calm facade, but I saw them cracking. Mrs. Rosa began to cry, but it wasn't tears of remorse, it was the tears of desperation. Mr. Carlos muttered something to their lawyer, while Diego kept his head down, not daring to look up. When the judge called a recess to review the evidence, I stepped outside, breathing in Boise's cold air. Jake patted my shoulder. "You did great," he said. "They've got no way out." I nodded, but my heart was still restless. I had spoken the truth, laid everything on the scales of justice, but would justice stand on my side? Standing under the gray Boise sky, I thought of the photo of Lake Coeur d'Alene hanging in my apartment, of the golden barley fields glowing under the sunset. That photo reminded me that light always exists, even in the darkest days. The next day, the courtroom was packed. The air was heavy, as if everyone was holding their breath, awaiting the verdict. The judge, with her stern face, entered, her eyes sharp but revealing no emotion. I sat beside Jake, gripping the edge of my chair, my heart pounding. The Martinez family sat across from us, but they no longer carried the confidence of the first day. Mr. Carlos held Mrs. Rosa's hand, but both avoided my gaze. Diego, in a gray-blue suit, looked like a boy caught red-handed, his eyes dodging mine, his shoulders slumped. The judge banged her gavel and the room fell silent. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, she began, her voice low and clear. "This court finds the defendant, Diego Martinez, guilty of grand theft. Evidence from the bank statement and GPS data shows that he illegally transferred $95,000 from the plaintiff Pedro Hernandez's account and stole his Toyota Corolla." I heard a sharp exhale from the Martinez family's side, but I kept my eyes fixed on the judge, not wanting to miss a single word. She continued, "Regarding the charges of child labor exploitation against Mr. Carlos Martinez and Mrs. Rosa Martinez, the court finds the evidence, including Mr. Hernandez's notebook, the testimonies of Mrs. Helen Carter and Mr. Juan Alvarez, compelling. The defendants forced Mr. Hernandez to work in harsh conditions as a child without pay and deprived him of his right to education. This was not household chores, but child labor exploitation, a serious violation of the law." Mrs. Rosa burst into tears, her sobs echoing in the courtroom, but I felt no pity. Those tears couldn't erase the years I was treated like a slave. The judge delivered the sentence. Diego was sentenced to 3 years in prison for theft, along with an order to repay the full $95,000 and return the car, or its equivalent value if it had been sold. Mr. Carlos and Mrs. Rosa were convicted of child labor exploitation, each receiving a 2-year prison sentence and ordered to pay damages for my emotional suffering. As the gavel struck, a cold rush of air swept through me, as if a door to the past had finally closed. Mr. Carlos bowed his head, his hands gripping the chair tightly. Mrs. Rosa covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably, but I knew it wasn't remorse. It was the collapse of the wall of lies they'd built over the years. Diego, for the first time, looked at me, his eyes empty as if all his arrogance had been drained. As I left the courtroom, I stepped outside, the afternoon sun shining down on Boise's streets, warm and gentle, a stark contrast to the cold wind of the previous day. Jake walked beside me, smiling. "Congratulations, Pedro," he said. "You did it." I nodded, but inside I didn't feel the triumph I'd expected. I wasn't happy because the Martinez family was punished, but because I was finally free. Free from the years of exploitation, from the accusations of being ungrateful, from the shadow of a family that was never truly mine. Back in Seattle, I sat in my small apartment, the streetlight filtering through the window, illuminating the Lake Coeur d'Alene photo. I thought about my journey, from the boy trapped in the diner's kitchen to the man standing in court demanding justice. I'd learned that family isn't those who raise you, but those who respect and value you. Mrs. Helen, Juan, Jake, they were my real family, the ones who stood by me when I needed them most. I picked up my camera, stepped onto the balcony, and snapped a photo of Seattle's streets under a light drizzle. The neon lights reflected on the wet pavement, creating a shimmering scene. I told myself, this is a new beginning. Justice isn't just a courtroom verdict, it's how I choose to live moving forward, free, strong, and unbound by the past. I would keep brewing coffee, taking photos, and telling stories through my lens. But above all, I would live for myself, not to prove anything to anyone. The lesson I drew from all this: never let anyone define your worth. Stand up even if you have nothing but your bare hands and fight for what you deserve. Justice doesn't always come easily, but it's worth pursuing. And when you find that light, like the golden barley fields in my photo, hold on to it because it will guide you through the darkest days.